Let's take a breath for a moment. Because this isn't one of those love stories that starts with once upon a time. It starts in silence, in solitude, in a chapter where no one is watching and nothing looks particularly magical. See, we've been taught a lot of strange things about love, that it'll find us when we least expect it, that someone's coming to complete us, that if we just dress the part, play the part, manifest hard enough, it'll finally show up. But here's the truth. Nobody says out loud. A soulmate doesn't arrive to finish a puzzle. They're revealed when we realize we were never missing pieces to begin with. Love doesn't bloom in desperation. It recognizes presence. It finds us not when we are chasing, grasping, performing, but when we've stopped doing all of that. When we sit quietly in our own energy and realize we are already full, already radiant. Most people spend their lives searching for the one. But the wise ones, they're not hunting. They're becoming. And that difference is everything. There's a stillness, a quiet kind of power that shows up when you're no longer trying to convince someone to choose you. You've already chosen yourself. And from that grounded place, love doesn't knock loudly or come with fireworks. It slips in through ordinary moments, a shared glance, a gentle conversation, a laugh that feels like home. I know a woman will call her Mia. She told me I used to think love was supposed to feel like being swept off my feet. But that always left me dizzy, unsteady, unsure. It wasn't until she slowed down, really slowed down, that she met someone who didn't sweep her away, but stood beside her rooted. And that steadiness, that was the love she didn't know she'd been searching for. Soulmates are not summoned by loneliness. They are drawn by alignment. And alignment doesn't happen through effort. It happens through becoming still enough to hear your own voice again. If you're listening to this right now wondering, when will I meet them? The better question might be, who am I becoming while I wait? Because love isn't something you stumble into, it's something you grow into. And when that growth becomes effortless, when your life starts to feel less like a performance and more like truth, that's when love arrives. Not to complete you, but to meet you. Let's explore something that rarely gets said, but changes everything once it clicks. Your energy introduces you long before your words ever do. We think attraction is about appearance, about charisma, about how we present ourselves to the world. But in truth, attraction is energetic. It's what your nervous system feels when someone enters a room. It's the silent resonance between two internal rhythms, and it either says safe or run. Here's the kicker: you don't attract what you wish for. You attract what you've normalized, and what you've normalized is often the product of your unconscious emotional patterns. There's neuroscience behind this. Your brain has something called mirror neurons. They help you read people emotionally even without realizing it. And your nervous system is constantly scanning for what feels familiar, not necessarily what feels healthy. So if you've lived in chaos, inconsistency, or emotional overextension, you might find yourself drawn to those very patterns. Not because they're good for you, but because your body recognizes them. And that's where awareness becomes your superpower. I once spoke with a woman named Ilara. She said, I'm always the one giving more, always bending, always adjusting. And somehow I still feel invisible. But what she didn't realize at first was her overgiving wasn't love. It was fear. A fear of not being enough unless she earned affection. So her kindness became a transaction. And while it looked like generosity on the outside, the energy underneath said, please don't leave. And people felt it even if they couldn't explain why. When she began healing that wound, she stopped giving to prove. She started giving from overflow, and that tiny shift changed everything. She didn't have to be louder or bolder. She just became clearer, softer, yet stronger. And in that new energy, she met someone who wasn't looking for someone to fix. He was looking for someone to see. And he saw her. Let me be clear. This is not about blame. It's about awareness. Because once you become aware of what energy you're living in, you can change the frequency. Ask yourself, do I feel safe in my own company? Do I give because I want to or because I'm afraid of not being chosen? Is my nervous system calm or in a constant state of alert? Because energy precedes interaction. And when your energy shifts from anxious to anchored, from over-explaining to simply existing, you don't need to chase your soulmate. You simply start to recognize them when they show up. Let's talk about something most people try to avoid: the wrong relationships. The painful ones. The ones that leave scars. You might be tempted to call them mistakes, But they're not. They are mirrors. See, life has a sacred way of showing us what we don't want, not to punish us, but to help us get crystal clear on what our soul can't afford to repeat. That's contrast. And contrast is not failure. Contrast is curriculum. A woman once told me about a man she loved deeply. He was magnetic, confident, intense until he wasn't. In private, he grew cold, dismissive, distant. She spent years shrinking herself just to fit into the tiny corners of his world, calling it love. But the longer she stayed, the more her spirit faded. Until one day, she wasn't in love anymore. She was in mourning. Not mourning him, but the parts of herself she had buried to keep the relationship alive. When she finally left, it wasn't because she hated him. It was because she remembered herself. That's what contrast does. It forces you to stop asking, how do I make them love me, and start asking, why did I forget how to love myself? The wrong loves aren't here to break you. They're here to sharpen your discernment. Contrast teaches you the difference between chemistry and compatibility, the difference between intensity and intimacy, the difference between being seen and simply being used. And once you've felt the ache of being misunderstood, unseen, or undervalued, something powerful happens. Your spirit gets pickier, your heart gets smarter, your soul stops falling for potential and starts aligning with peace. There's a phrase in Buddhist wisdom, only after the rain do you smell the earth. In love, it means this. You only recognize warmth after you've sat in the cold. You only notice peace after you've been touched by chaos, and you only value true connection when you've felt what it's like to be with someone who doesn't recognize your depth. So when the next person comes into your life, you'll pay less attention to their words and more attention to your own body's response. Because contrast teaches you to listen differently, not with your ears, but with your nervous system. Let's go deeper into something that often frustrates us most on this journey: the waiting, the silence, the feeling of nothing's happening. But here's the truth no one tells you: stillness isn't stagnation, it's sacred preparation. Most people are looking for love in the loud moments. But what if the most important meeting of your life was never going to come with flashing lights or grand entrances? What if it slipped in gently? Through a pause, a change of plans, a season of stillness you didn't want. There's a man I once spoke with, kind, intuitive, grounded. He said, I met my wife at a bus stop I wasn't even supposed to be at. That day his train was delayed. He took a detour, sat on a bench, looked up, and there she was. They started talking not about big things, but about the weather, the city, the book she held in her hands. He said it wasn't magic, it was ordinary. But something inside me just settled. That's divine timing, not the noise, but the knowing. Here's what I've learned. Alignment often arrives disguised as inconvenience, a missed opportunity, a delay, a door that slammed shut only to redirect you to a path you didn't know you needed. And those detours, they're not mistakes, they are appointments. But in order to see them, you have to be present, not obsessed with the timeline, not clinging to what if, just grounded, open, attuned. The nervous system plays a role here too. When you are in fight or flight, when you're anxious, desperate, overstimulated, you miss the cues. You can't perceive divine invitations when your soul is trying to survive. That's why slowing down matters. Why practicing stillness isn't just spiritual, it's biological. You won't hear the whisper if your life is filled with noise. You won't see the invitation if your mind is racing with fear. But when you slow down, when your breath becomes steady and your thoughts soften suddenly, you begin to notice things again. The tone in someone's voice, the kindness in their eyes, the sense that maybe this moment matters. God does not operate on urgency. He operates on readiness, and sometimes the only reason you haven't met your person yet is because you're still learning how to receive them. Let's talk about something subtle, so subtle most people miss it. That quiet inner nudge, that soft whisper that says this person feels different. Not exciting in a roller coaster way, but familiar like home. That whisper, that's your intuition speaking. Not fantasy, not projection, not butterflies born of anxiety, but a deep calm knowing that comes from inside your bones. In Eastern wisdom, intuition is described like still water. When the surface is agitated, you see nothing, but when it is still, you see everything clearly. The same is true in love. When your inner world is chaotic, you mistake red flags for intensity. You confuse anxious chemistry with deep connection. But when your spirit is still, you can finally discern, does this person regulate my nervous system or rattle it? Let's demystify this with science. Your brain is actually designed to pick up microsignals, tone of voice, eye movement, posture, and it processes them faster than you can think. This is your neurointuition, also called pattern recognition. It's how you sense when someone feels safe, grounded, genuine or not. But here's the thing. You can only access this inner radar when your body is calm. You can't tune into it when you're spinning in mental loops or performing to be liked. This is why stillness isn't weakness. It's strategic. It gives your soul a chance to speak before your mind interrupts with fear. I know a woman, her name was Grace. She told me every time I ignored my intuition, I paid for it. She'd meet someone, feel a slight discomfort, but push it aside. Maybe I'm just overthinking, she'd say. But months later, that very discomfort would become the reason she had to walk away. Eventually, she stopped silencing that small voice. And when she met her now partner, she said something profound. It wasn't the sparks that convinced me, it was the peace. So how do you strengthen this compass? By slowing down, by practicing presence, by getting quiet enough to feel your own energy before you entangle it with someone else's. Your body knows, your spirit knows, it's just waiting for you to listen. And here's the paradox. When you stop searching for signs, they begin to appear. When you stop demanding proof, you feel resonance. When you stop grasping the right thing, naturally flows toward you. That's the art of intuitive attraction. Not chasing love, but becoming sensitive enough to recognize it when it arrives. Let's shift the lens now, because sometimes it's not about who's coming into your life. It's about who no longer gets access to you. Let that sink in. Elevation isn't just about healing. It's about frequency. It's not about becoming better than who you were. It's about becoming so clear, so self-aware, so deeply grounded in your value that certain patterns, people, and dynamics can't even find you anymore. Here's something powerful to remember. The people you attract reflect the level you're operating from. When you're vibrating in scarcity and self-doubt and survival mode, you tend to draw in those who confirm that state, emotionally unavailable partners. Inconsistent attention, situationships full of almost. But when you begin to rise, when your thoughts shift, when your boundaries solidify, when your nervous system becomes calm and your self-respect becomes consistent, the old frequency no longer matches. And the people who once circled your orbit quietly disappear. Not because you rejected them, but because they simply can't reach you anymore. There's a story I love. A woman in her late 30s, brilliant, kind, deeply giving, kept attracting the same kind of partner. Men who would love bomb then ghost, who praised her in public but dismissed her in private. After another breakup, she didn't ask, "What's wrong with me?" She asked, "What am I allowing to feel normal?" That's actually a form of self-abandonment. That question changed her life. She took a year off from dating, not from fear, but from devotion. She took herself on dates. She learned how to rest without guilt. She studied her patterns, and slowly she stopped performing. She started embodying. And when she elevated, her energy shifted so profoundly that the kind of men who once clung to her disappeared. In their place came someone different, calm, clear, kind, not flashy, but real. He didn't chase her because she was hard to get. He came toward her because she was easy to recognize. Elevation is magnetic. It speaks before you do. It communicates without words. When you rise into wholeness, you stop being accessible to what drains you. You stop negotiating your worth for crumbs. You stop confusing attention for love. And you begin to attract those who are already operating at your level. People who aren't intimidated by your standards, but inspired by them. Ask yourself, what version of me am I offering to the world? Who still has access to my energy that no longer aligns with my peace? Am I climbing the mountain just to be seen or to meet the version of myself I've never truly known? Because when you rise, truly rise, you don't need to chase your soulmate. You'll meet them at the summit. Let's talk about the quiet season, the one nobody posts about. The one where your phone barely rings, where conversations feel shallow, where it feels like God has taken you off the grid. But what if that's not rejection? What if it's protection? There are seasons where God hides you not to punish you, but to prepare you. He clears the noise, closes doors, and shields your energy so you can hear your own voice again. Solitude can feel lonely, But it's also where your deepest work is done, where the masks fall off, where the distractions fade, where you stop asking who's coming into my life and start asking who am I when I'm alone. It's in this space when there's nothing to prove, nothing to chase, no audience to perform for that your true self begins to rise. I once heard the story of a woman in her early 60s. She'd been widowed young, raised her children, and made peace with being alone. Not bitter, not broken, just still. She spent her mornings walking by the river, journaling, reading poetry. One day, at a silent meditation retreat, she sat across from a stranger. No words, just breath, presence. And something passed between them, not chemistry, not a spark, but a quiet mutual awareness. They didn't fall in love instantly. They unfolded into it. Two people rooted in their own being, meeting in stillness. She told me later, he didn't feel like a firework. He felt like a fireplace, the kind you sit beside for hours and never want to leave. This is what stillness does. It doesn't call in love with noise. It clears the space so love can enter unannounced. And the deeper truth is, many women miss their soulmate not because he hasn't arrived, but because they haven't yet become available to receive him. If your life is full of noise, digital, emotional, mental, you will miss the whisper. If you are constantly doing, fixing, striving, you'll overlook the person who arrives quietly without drama. Stillness is the space where divine appointments occur. It's the silence before the music begins. So if you're in a quiet season right now, don't rush it, don't fill it, don't numb it. Sit with it. Let it shape you. Let it show you that you were never alone, only in preparation. Because some of the greatest love stories don't begin with fireworks. They begin in solitude, in soul work, in surrender. There's a particular kind of ache that lives in a woman's heart. Not from being unloved, but from being misunderstood while loving fully. You gave everything, you showed up, you stayed loyal, you opened your soul wide, only to be told you're too intense, you're too emotional, you want too much. But what if you were never too much? What if you were just too awake for someone who hadn't met themselves yet? This is where contrast becomes sacred. Before you meet the one who honors your depth, life will often introduce you to those who reject it. Not to punish you, but to help you see yourself more clearly. A woman once told me, I thought I was broken because I loved deeply. But the truth was, I just kept giving my soul to people who only knew how to hold surfaces. Her story wasn't rare. She loved a man who praised her light when others were watching but dimmed it in private. He couldn't meet her emotion, so she began to silence herself. Tone herself down, make herself smaller. Until one day she stopped asking, how do I make him stay? And started asking, why am I staying in a place that makes me disappear? That's what contrast teaches. It shows you where you're still seeking love to fix wounds, where you're mistaking tension for passion, where you're negotiating your worth in the name of loyalty. And slowly the questions begin to change. From how do I keep them to do they see me? From what more can I give to is this energy even reciprocal? Contrast sharpens your inner compass. It teaches you to recognize what doesn't align so you can make space for what does. There's science behind this too. It's called interoception, your ability to read internal signals. Your heart rate, your breath, that knot in your stomach. When you're with someone who activates your peace, your body exhales. When you're with someone who triggers your anxiety, your body braces. And over time, you learn to listen not just to your mind, but to your nervous system. I know another woman, her name was Liana. She once had a man tell her, you feel too deeply. She took that as a flaw. Until she healed, until she elevated, until she met someone who said, your depth, that's my favorite thing about you. You don't scare me. You awaken me. That's the difference. Same woman, same soul, different mirror. Here's the secret. When you elevate, your too much becomes sacred. Not everyone will be able to hold it, but the one who's meant to, they'll never ask you to shrink again. They won't run from your fullness. They'll rise to meet it. There's something sacred that happens when you stop chasing, stop scripting, and start trusting. You begin to notice how life leaves clues not in neon signs, but in subtle alignments. A missed bus, an unexpected delay, a random conversation that lingers in your mind for days, a person you feel drawn to without explanation. This isn't coincidence. This is synchronicity. In spiritual teaching, synchronicity is the universe's way of winking at you. A signal that you're exactly where you're meant to be, even if it doesn't look like it. From a psychological lens, it's your subconscious pattern recognition, the brain pulling together millions of data points and whispering, "Pay attention, something about this matters." But from a soul perspective, it's a gentle orchestration, a divine thread weaving people and moments together in ways the logical mind could never plan. I remember a woman named Nia. She said the moment she met her partner felt like nothing. No butterflies, no dramatic spark, just a calm sense of I can exhale around you. They met in line at a bookstore. He made a simple comment about the novel she was holding. They talked for 5 minutes. She almost forgot the moment entirely until she bumped into him again the next week, and again the next. It wasn't planned, it wasn't forced, it was aligned. And it only happened because she wasn't rushing, she was present. Here's what most people miss. Divine timing rarely arrives with fanfare. It shows up in small decisions. The walk you almost didn't take. The invitation you almost declined. The coffee shop you never meant to enter. That's how God moves, softly, precisely, through the mundane because the sacred hides best in plain sight. But here's the key. To perceive synchronicity, you must cultivate inner quiet. If your mind is cluttered, if your energy is scattered, you'll miss the very doorway you've been praying for. This isn't about overthinking every moment. It's about becoming sensitive to resonance. It's the feeling when time slows down around someone. You feel more like yourself in their presence. Your soul leans in, even if your mind isn't sure why. Those are not accidents. They're invitations. Synchronicity doesn't ask for urgency. It asks for awareness. And the more present you become, the more clearly you recognize the people and moments that were always meant to find you. So here we are. After the searching, the solitude, the healing, after the elevation, the synchronicity, the quiet whispers from within. We arrive at the truth most people never realize. You don't find your soulmate. You become the version of yourself that can recognize them. Love is not a reward for suffering. It's not a prize handed out when you've finally proven your worth. It's a mirror, a reflection of your internal world. And as your energy shifts, so does the kind of connection you become available for. When you were anxious, you attracted intensity. When you were unclear, you tolerated confusion. When you were wounded, you bonded through pain. But now you've changed. Not because of anyone else, but because you chose to stop abandoning yourself. There's a parable I've always loved. A woman climbs a mountain not to be seen, not to escape, but to meet herself at the summit. She sheds her guilt, her people-pleasing, her need to perform. She walks through storms, through silence, through self-doubt. And when she reaches the top, she finds stillness, not loneliness, not emptiness, but clarity. And it's there, not below, not halfway, but there on the mountaintop that she sees someone else. Not someone who was carried, but someone who climbed. Their eyes meet, not with hunger, but with peace. Because they didn't find each other through chasing, they met through becoming. That's how divine love works. It doesn't arrive to save you. It meets you in your sovereignty. It aligns with your wholeness. And it says, I see you. I recognize what you've built within yourself because I've built it too. You no longer have to over-explain. You no longer tolerate half-effort. You no longer chase attention that isn't anchored in depth. Why? Because you've stopped seeking from lack and started living from overflow. Now the question is no longer where is he, but rather am I still honoring what my spirit truly desires? The love you're calling in now is different. It doesn't confuse you, it confirms you. It doesn't rush you, it respects your pace. It doesn't demand a performance, it meets your presence. It doesn't complete you, it complements the woman you've become. And you'll know it's right not because your heart races, but because your nervous system exhales. This is how God works. He doesn't introduce your soulmate when you're desperate. He introduces them when you're disciplined in peace. When your boundaries are clear. When your days are full of intention. When your solitude no longer feels like waiting but preparation. That's when it happens. And when it does, you'll look back and realize every lonely night, every ended chapter, every tear, every no was God clearing space for something sacred. Not a rescue, but a resonance. So let this be your reminder. You are not late. You are not broken. You are not too much. You are becoming. And as you continue to rise, trust this. The one who's meant to walk beside you is rising too. And when you meet, it will not be chaos. It will not be confusion. It will be clarity and peace, and timing that feels like breath slow, steady, undeniable. Love won't arrive with a bang. It will arrive as a knowing, and when it does, you won't have to chase it. You'll simply say, "Oh, there you are. I've been becoming for you this whole time."